Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about a subject that I don't feel is discussed enough, and that is the long term effects of emotional abuse. The truth is, there are long term mental and physical effects from being involved in emotionally abusive relationships. All abusive relationships are toxic, and some of us don't realize we're in one until we start feeling the mental and physical effects from the abuse. Some people even say that emotional abuse is worse than physical abuse. And that's because the physical wounds will eventually heal, but the emotional scars usually don't heal right away and may be there for a very long time. So let me just say that again. Sometimes people feel that emotional abuse is worse because they say, at least with the physical wounds, it will eventually heal. But the emotional scars usually don't heal right away, and it may be for a very long time. So while physical abuse isn't less egregious than emotional abuse, some will still argue that emotional abuse is far worse. Okay? I think both types of abuse are equally toxic, and it can leave scars and result in negative consequences for their victims. Okay, so I don't really like to get involved in that kind of debate, whether one is worse than the other. Regardless whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse, they're both toxic behaviors that should not be tolerated by anybody, and both have consequences. Both have long-term effects, consequences from the abuse. And regardless which is worse, the bottom line is that we all need to be very careful of what type of people we allow into our lives so we can avoid the negative effects of emotional abuse. This is a list of some negative effects of this is a list of some negative effects of mental effects. Okay. So these are the mental effects: low self-esteem, feeling negative about yourself, lacking self confidence, self critical, and in the worst cases, these feelings can lead to depression. Okay, and the next mental effect is anxiety, feelings of anxiety, panic attacks, and difficulty sleeping. Okay, and depression is the next one, a mood disorder causing feelings of sadness and loss of interest in activities for a long period of time, feelings of hopelessness, low self worth, losing the ability to enjoy life, changes in how one thinks, how one eats, sleeps, and acts. Unfortunately, in some cases, chronic depression can lead to suicidal thoughts. So this is something we need to be careful about. For those of us who are feel that we are feeling kind of depressed and it's just been going on for a while, we don't want it to get to chronic depression. Okay, when you start feeling that way, you may need to seek help and either take, I don't know if they're going to recommend you to have medication, or I know there's drugs out there for people who are depressed, but the sooner the better that you get help so that you can start feeling, so you can stop feeling that way and get some help. Okay, the next one is suicidal thoughts, which we just talked about. If you're not careful, people who are chronically depressed could become suicidal, and that's feelings of ending your life. Okay, and we've all heard those unfortunate stories that people get so depressed that no one is even aware of their emotions, and they end up ending their life, which is very sad. Um, the next one is trust issues, feelings of not being able to be vulnerable or feel safe to trust in relationships. Okay, that happens a lot too, right, folks? If you've been emotionally traumatized from a previous relationship, or even in childhood, you may have trust issues as an adult, and so usually this doesn't show up until you're in a relationship and you realize that you're having problems trusting somebody. Okay, or you get triggered and you realize that you're having problems and you're feeling uncomfortable. Okay, the next one is substance abuse. Some people turn to drug and alcohol addictions to destructively cope with emotional abuse. Okay, so this is another thing that we typically see, that I'm sure that you've all seen it as well. Uh, Sometimes people, as a way of coping with the emotional abuse, they start turning to distractions or other things like drug addictions or even alcohol addictions. Okay, and that's not healthy. And then there's eating disorders. Some people turn to eating disorders like binge eating, purging, or starving to destructively cope with emotional abuse. Okay, so we've all heard people that have eating disorders, and this may be a mental effect from being in an emotional abusive relationship. And I know for a fact that I know people that have had eating disorders, and Sometimes it does come from trauma from childhood, where people have been traumatized as a child, and now they're trying to, and as a child they learn to cope with this, the stress and the emotional abuse, and they start to binge eat, and they start to have all these eating problems and disorders. And then post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I'm sure you guys heard of all that. Usually we hear that in relation to men that come back from war. Um, but we also now know that it's not just people that are in war that come back with this post traumatic stress disorder. It could happen also if you've also been in a long term abusive relationship, and there is a connection there, right? If you're in war, if you're a soldier in war and you've been traumatized emotionally from just the ugliness of war and death, right? Um, the same thing, it parallels the kind of emotional trauma that people can go through when they've been in an emotionally abusive relationship for a very long time. Okay, so um, this is something that, so I just want to say PTSD is living in constant state of stress from abusers using fears, threats, and control tactics to exert power over their victims. Okay, so let me just repeat that again. Post traumatic stress disorder, which is also known as PTSD, is living in a constant state of stress from abusers using fears, threats, and control tactics to exert power over their victims. Okay, and we often see that a lot in people that are in highly abusive relationships. Their partner will use all these kind of tactics to try to exert control over them, and that's very traumatizing for their victims. Okay. Okay, now these are the list of negative physical effects of emotional abuse. Okay, these are physical health effects. What we just talked about was a list of mental health effects, and these are physical health effects. Chronic pain and diseases. The overwhelming stress from emotional abuse can take its toll by wreaking havoc in the body, creating serious sickness and ill health. Okay, and we all have heard about that, right? We know that stress is not healthy for you, and this is why. Okay, especially if you've been under a stress for a very long period of time, you can start developing health issues and chronic pain. And so um, we need to keep that in mind as well, that these physical health effects are serious. And sleep disorders, sleep developing sleep problems like insomnia. Now I know we mentioned the sleep disorders in the mental effects category because it's actually in both. Because if some people that are emotionally traumatized or abused, they they start, because their mind is not at peace. They have trouble sleeping. So that does play into the mental part of it, right? The mental effects, but also eventually it repetitively, when they cannot sleep, it becomes a physical problem, and then they develop sleep disorders like insomnia. Okay. So, as a recap, emotional abuse is obviously something we need to be aware of and we must take very seriously. Whether we are in a new relationship or a long term relationship, we need to make the daily effort to maintain our relationships to ensure we are building healthy, successful relationships so we can avoid the long term mental and physical effects of emotional abuse that result from toxic relationships. So, let me say that again. As a recap, emotional abuse is obviously something we need to be aware of and we must take very seriously. Whether we are in a new relationship or a long term relationship, we need to make the daily effort to maintain our relationships to ensure we are building healthy, successful relationships so we can avoid the long term mental and physical effects of emotional abuse that result from toxic relationships. Okay, so what does that mean? What that means essentially is that it's so important that if you recognize and notice that you're not feeling right, the moment you're in a relationship and you notice there's a pattern of you feeling unhappy, you're depressed, um, you're just not yourself, okay, and you start having all these effects, these mental effects, where you have anxiety, low self-esteem, suicidal thoughts, hopefully not, um, trust issues, substance abuse, eating disorders, PTSD, or physical effects like chronic pain and diseases and sleep disorders. It's a red flag, okay, folks. That means it's an alarm system from your body and your mind that you need to get help. You need to start tending to yourself and taking care of yourself, and just be aware that you're feeling the long term effects of emotional abuse. Um, and for those of you who are currently involved in an emotionally abusive relationship, there are two things you need to do immediately. Number one, you need to set boundaries for yourself. If you haven't seen my video, How to Deal with a Toxic Relationship, please check out that video because it will explain how to set the boundaries. I recently, a couple weeks ago, I did a video on how to deal with toxic relationships. That's a good video to check out, folks. It will go into detail of how you set boundaries. That's very, very important, especially when you're dealing with toxic people, because toxic relationships are destructive to your mental and physical health. And this is exactly what we're talking about here. Okay, so that's the first thing that you need to do. The second thing is to seek couples counseling as soon as possible. If your partner refuses to go with you, then you still should go to counseling for yourself. Your mental and physical health is at stake here, and the sooner you get help, the sooner you can begin healing. You deserve to live a free life of emotional abuse. Please get help and heal soon. Okay, so again, the second step is you need to seek couples counseling as soon as possible. If your partner refuses to go with you, then you still should go to counseling for yourself. Your mental and physical health is at stake here, and the sooner you get help, the sooner you can begin healing. You deserve to live a life free of emotional abuse. Please get help and heal soon. Okay, so folks, this is a short video today. I think wraps it up for what we want to talk about. It's not really the most pleasant thing to discuss, but I don't feel it's discussed enough, as I said earlier. We all have recognized these effects. We've all been actually experienced some of these effects. Maybe not to the extreme of long-term wise, but certainly for all of us who've lived long enough, who've been in unhealthy relationships, we understand that these effects are very, very, harmful to us if not addressed. Okay, and I'm not saying all effects have to be addressed by a counselor or even drugs, right? If you have a good friend who's positive and happy, and you trust them, by all means, talk to your friends. Surround yourself with positive people that can possibly help you get out of the funk that you're in. You may just be in a temporary funk. Just because you have low self-esteem, or if you have these other issues like depression, it may be a temporary kind of, sadness. It may not be long-term. So, but what we're talking about here is for long-term effects. Okay, so if you have a short-term feelings of sadness, and short-term you're a little stressed and you have problems sleeping, it's still something you need to pay attention to and address. Okay, that's the time you need to realize that you're not feeling well, that you need to get help before it becomes long-term. Okay, and especially if you're in a relationship where you're starting to feel these effects, you need to go to couples counseling and start setting their boundaries. Okay, those two things are paramount. It's not just for long-term effects. It's if you are in any kind of toxic relationship, whether it's with a partner, family, friends, relatives, coworkers, boss, you need to set those boundaries immediately. And as a matter of fact, it was for a work environment situation. I would suggest that you start looking for another job. Okay, I've been in a couple of dysfunctional work environments where I should say they're toxic work environments, and typically those don't work out to your favor. And the reason why is because there's usually there's usually there's a certain environment tone in a workplace. Sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's not. So if you're walking into a healthy work environment, which you sometimes none of us don't realize it till we're actually there for a while, for a couple of weeks, and we start noticing these things are odd, right? But typically when you're on a job interview, you don't really know if the new job's work environment is going to be healthy or not. But as soon as you find out that it's not healthy, you need to probably start looking for another job. Okay? I have rarely seen a situation at work where you can improve a toxic work environment. Usually it comes from the top down. Okay? It's very difficult, especially if you have a boss who's toxic. Because as I said, from my experiences, the toxicity comes from the top on down. So if the framework at the top is not healthy, the rest of it below is not going to be healthy, because that's where it starts. Okay, I feel leaders are on top. They need to lead their organization. If the organization's unhealthy, that's a reflection on their leadership. Okay, and the people they're hiring, the people they're coaching. Managers should not behave in a toxic manner. Unfortunately, we all know all of us who've lived long enough and have had a few jobs already, we understand that there is good management and bad management. But anyway, I'm getting off track. I'm not here to talk about work. Now I'm going to have to say that for a different video. But in general, I just want to impress upon you all that if you do find yourself in a abusive, emotionally abusive relationship, whether it's short term or long term, especially long term, okay, we need to take it very seriously, and we need to set boundaries, and we need to get counseling. Okay? I hope this video has been helpful, and if it resonates with you, please click like and click share. Comment below, or if you have questions, and please subscribe to my channel so you can be notified of all my future videos. And until next time, I will see you soon. Okay, bye.